Hello, and welcome to Straight from the CPA's Mouth. I'm Laura Lee, Director of External Relations at CPA Alberta, and it is my pleasure to be your host today. Joining me is CPA Alberta CEO Rachel Miller, and over the course of this episode, we'll be discussing perfection, women in the accounting profession, and leadership.
150,000 new businesses are created in Canada each year, but only
Emotional intelligence is a critical skill for leaders. How do I develop
Artificial intelligence will take over analytics, big data, trend analysis.
Hearing that Alberta needs to diversify its economy, but how do we do that?
Create new opportunities for young innovators.
Does account for 77% of all private jobs
traded
created
companies.
in Canada.
Filter out the noise. Hear it straight from the CPA's mouth.
So, Rachel, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and joining me today. Really, really excited to have you and to talk to you over the next bunch of minutes. Do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me to do this. I've listened to all of them so far.
Ooh.
So I don't know if I'll be able to listen to my own, but that will probably go into some of your questions you're going to ask me. So I'm the CEO of CPA Alberta and love the role that I have. I have quite the honor to lead the organization and to make sure we're fulfilling our regulatory mandate and giving our stakeholders what they need. So.
Okay, sounds great. So before I launch into the question of the episode, I'm just curious, you mentioned you listened to all the episodes, and as someone who represents CPA Alberta, has met CPAs across the province, have you been surprised by any of things and the insights that some of the CPAs that have been guests on our podcast have said?
Yeah, I would say I've learned from all of them. They've all been a little bit different and have something different to add. I think I was listening to one where I was actually quoted in it, and I was like, wow, I have never been quoted before. Yeah. It was sort of like a moment for me. So that was kind of neat. It's really neat to hear sort of what our members are doing and some of the things that they're passionate about and their stories, because every story is a little bit different and you take something away from each of them. I know I was just listening to Steve Allen's and his passion for the work that he does and his perspective on success is something that, really resonated with me as well. So it was really interesting to hear.
Great. And now we get to lend your voice to the mix.
Excellent.
Okay. So on our last episode, our guest, Harriet Tinka, posed the following question for us. At what point should you consider yourself good enough? So Rachel, before we delve into the point where you consider yourself good enough, I'd like to first ask you, have you reached a point in your professional life where you know where good enough is? Or is this something that you still struggle with?
Well, I think there's probably a couple ways to look at what's good enough. My personal perspective on that is that as long as you are doing the best you can with what you have, that is good enough. And so you just need to continue to develop that and continue to grow. I don't think you ever get to that point where you're done growing or done learning. I think you can learn something from every situation that you're in. So I think you got to balance that. You've got to be careful not to always underestimate yourself or think you're not good enough. But on the flip side, is anyone ever done learning and growing? So
That's great advice. What makes it hard for people to say, okay, this is good enough. I am good enough. I've done the best that I can.
Well, I think there's lots of external expectations that are put on you, but also your own expectations. I think they say everyone is their own worst critic, and I would say the same. I have trouble listening to me speaking or going back and seeing videos of myself because I always think, I could have done that better.
Yeah.
And even when I was in university, I remember I'd write a test and I'd probably have gotten a really good mark on it. But looking back and thinking about it, I'm like, I could have answered that question differently. Why didn't I answer that? Why did I get so stressed? So it's something in your personality, I guess, and also in the way you're raised and those environmental factors that we're just very critical of our own actions, always trying to be better.
So if it's hard for you to listen to yourself, I'm glad that we're having you as a podcast guest.
Yeah, I can't guarantee I'm going to listen to this.
Okay, fair enough. But I'm thankful for everyone else who was listening to this. So if it was hard for you to listen to yourself in the past, what made you realize that there's a point where I've said what I've said and I can't go back to it, and what I've put out there is what I've put out there?
Yeah, I think, that's something You learn over time. And it's really when you look at the ramifications of saying things that were incorrect or maybe doing things that you didn't think was the best that you could have done.
Yeah.
And when you look back, like what happened? Like how bad was that? It probably didn't create any huge issues. And so you kind of learn to accept that you're not perfect and that you're going to make mistakes. And as long as you learn from those mistakes and you don't keep repeating them, life goes on and you continue to get to do great things. So.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that you say that because as CEO, you would imagine that when you're doing speaking in the public, if you say, for example, happen to provide misinformation, that's more important than say earlier in your career.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I think the other thing you learn is that if you do provide misinformation, to not be afraid to then say, oh, you know what, actually, that's not what I meant to say, or I didn't really articulate that properly, and admit that you said it wrong. Because the worst thing is if you put something out there that's wrong and then you stand behind it knowing that it's wrong. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to be a bit humble and be able to say, you know what, I'm sorry, I messed up on that one.
Yeah. Well, and people mess up all the time. Sometimes your brain works faster than the words that are coming out of your mouth, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
So going back to this episode's question, at what point should you consider yourself good enough? So is there some sort of sign or feeling that you get that makes you realize, okay, I've done the best that I can? What makes you realize that this is as far as I should take this?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it is really just being able to be self-aware enough to look at yourself and say, did I do the best that I could have done? Okay. And if you did, that was good enough. If you left something on the table, if you should have done better, then that's the point where you're like, okay, how next time can I do that better? Because I haven't reached that good enough yet.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you have for someone who's looking for their own dividing line between perfection and I've done my best?
Yeah, in that one, I would say there's probably a little bit of a difference between perfection and done my best.
Okay. Fair.
So I think there's times where perfection is necessary, where you need to have things right. But those are actually probably more few and far between than doing something good enough. The amount of effort to achieve that extra 5% towards perfection, you have to really look at and say, is that necessary in this case? I would think a profession like doctors probably do have to think that, yes, they need to be perfect, not good enough.
Yeah.
But lots of times in our decision making that we're making as CPAs and as leaders, you're looking at the information that you have at a time and making a decision, and it's never perfect. Mm-hmm. And there's no right answer. There's no right or wrong answer. So you need to go in a direction, go with your gut, and see where it takes you. And sometimes you will be wrong, and you need to be able to come back and turn around, change paths, and get back on the right path. And unlike a profession where lives are in balance, we have an opportunity to do that. So I think being good enough and being perfect, I think, are two different things. To know that you're good enough is, again, you look back and you say, could I have done better? Could I have done things differently? Did I learn anything from this? And if you're at that point where you have done what you need to do and you think that's the best you could have done with the information that you had, that is good enough.
Yeah.
But I think as you're starting your career, you just want to show people what you can do. You want to impress. You want to make sure that you're not letting anyone down. And then as you move forward in your career, I think you get more confidence that people do respect you and that you have something to give and that your opinions and your leadership is worth it. And so then good enough is okay.
Yeah. So in terms of I've made the best decision I have with the information that I have, and it's okay. I can course correct. I can stop this bus and change directions. Is that something that you're comfortable with, making that decision of, okay, this was the wrong track. I need to reassess this?
I think it is something that I'm more comfortable than a lot of people with. I don't change tracks lightly. You have to recognize that you made a decision and there's a lot of people on that bus. So if you're going to change the direction, you're not just changing the direction for yourself, you're changing the direction for all your passengers as well.
True.
And so I don't think it's something you want to take too lightly, but I am more comfortable than I would have been 5-10 years ago saying, you know what? now we've got this other information. I think we should go in this other direction, and here's how we should get it to make sure we mitigate our risks, and not keep driving that bus to a destination where I realize there's a storm and no one's going to have fun when they get off anyway.
Yeah.
So sometimes people commit to a certain direction and they're afraid to turn it around or to choose a different direction, because you have to admit that you maybe might have made a decision that wasn't the right decision. And sometimes it was a wrong decision, but most of the times it wasn't. It was that you got more information as you went along that made another decision look better. So I think it takes experience to be able to say, okay, yeah, know what? This isn't the right direction. It takes experience to know what the ramifications of that is on the passengers you have on your bus.
Yeah.
And then to say, okay, yep, this is the right decision to make. We need to turn this bus around and apologize for it, and then move into the new exciting direction.
Okay. What if for anybody who is, now that we're using this bus analogy, who's driving a bus but doesn't necessarily have passengers, aren't quite in that leadership position, but are having trouble reassessing, and what advice would you have for them to maybe pump the brakes a little bit, and how do they go about doing that?
Well, I think one of the things, and I often say in my speeches that I give to new graduates, is you always want to have a direction. You don't want to be wandering aimlessly. You don't want to be driving that bus down all these back roads with no direction at all. But you also have to be careful that you're not just headed in one direction and ignoring all the things around you. You want to make sure that as you're on that path, that if a door opens, or if we're using the bus analogy, if a side road comes up with a little peach stand, you don't mind stopping and seeing if that would be interesting, and supporting that little farmer's market that you see as you drive by. Yeah. So it's a balance. You want to have a direction in your mind of where you want to go, but you want to be open enough that if other opportunities come up that are intriguing to you, that you take those opportunities. I would say there was no point in my early career where I thought, I'm going to be the CEO of CPA Alberta. So if I hadn't kept those opportunities open and kept looking for where I wanted to be next, I wouldn't have got to where I am today. But if I didn't head down a certain direction in the first place, I wouldn't have gotten where I am today. So I think it is just making sure that when you're starting your career, that you give some good thought to your goals and how you're going to achieve them, but you also reassess on a regular basis to see if things have changed that make you want to make different goals, or to see if there's a different direction that you want to try out. And it's scary to do something different.
Yeah, it is.
I know when I went from practice review, where I was responsible for ensuring that firms were meeting standards. I love standards. I know standards. I'm comfortable with standards. And I loved the role I was in. So when the opportunity came up to move into a different leadership role, it was a little scary, because I was like, I don't know. I like what I'm doing. I'm really good at it. What if I'm not good at this new role? It takes a lot of soul searching and a lot of talking to those people that, mentor you to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to go in this direction. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
It was quite good.
So you mentioned, obviously, your end goal wasn't to become CEO of CPA Alberta, but did you have your sights set on like a C-suite position?
Well, I would say yes, in a sense, in that I would have thought early in my career that it would have been more partner of a firm.
Okay.
So I think that's very similar
Yeah.
to a C-suite position. You're in a leadership role. If I go way back before I even decided I was going to be an accountant, I was looking more that I would be more entrepreneurial, more on my own. And then as I kind of tried new things, I found that actually I quite enjoyed working with boards and with other people. So that's what sort of led me in that direction.
Great. So going back to this concept of good enough, and the original question is, you obviously, you're a mother, you're a wife, you're a dedicated volunteer, you chair committees. So you're a person who is very busy and wears many hats. So this concept of good enough, is that line where you decide if you're good enough the same regardless of which hat you wear? Is it easier to say, I'm good enough as a mother? Is that the same point as I'm good enough as a CEO, as a professional, as a volunteer, whatever hat that you're wearing?
Oh, that's a tough question. And actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, as you become a mother, you learn that you can't be perfect.
Yeah.
And so if you were a perfectionist before then, that quickly disappears. Because balancing all of those things, I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, there are times where you want to be more than good enough, where you want to get things right. And there's times where good enough is okay. And I think it's a constant challenge to figure out where those areas of your life are. Obviously, when you're raising kids, you want to do the best you can to give them the opportunities that they need to grow and develop and be contributors to society. So probably work a little bit more at being more than good enough there. But you also have to learn to rely on other people too. So I'm fortunate being just celebrated my 25th wedding anniversary actually on the weekend.
Congratulations.
So I've had a partner through all my career actually, starting in university and who actually encouraged me to get into the CPA profession. And so between the two of us, I think we end up being pretty good. Individually, we're probably just good enough.
That's a great answer. When you read articles about women who are in high-ranking positions, they talk a lot about how they're under pressure to not just do it all, but do it well. And, in terms of balance competing priorities, raise families, volunteer, have active social lives, be great leaders. Is that something that you ever experienced? Yeah,
I think it is natural as women are becoming more into the work world and more dominant leaders. And I think it's something we actually put on ourselves, that we think that we need to show that we are better and that we can be there and that we're good enough for it. But, for me, I think early on in my career, I realized, you can't be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I was fortunate to have, whether it was the way I was raised, my family support or whatnot, that I felt okay with doing the best that I could do, and that had to be good enough. So I felt that in the beginning, you felt that you had to be better than the man beside you.
Yeah.
But as you realize and get more confident in your own skills, you realize, you know what? You're skilled. And people should appreciate you for that. And if they don't, you really want to be in those environments anyway. And so as you get more confident in what you can do, I think that ends up speaking for itself.
Okay. What advice would you have for a young female professional who is still working on building that confidence and still feels that pressure to prove themselves?
Finding a good mentor, finding someone who's been there before you. We're very fortunate. We aren't the first women leaders in the profession. We've had women leaders come through before us. And so if that's something that you're struggling with, find someone who's been there and who's been through that before and see what they did to be able to develop that confidence. And I would recommend to anyone, women and men who are coming through and trying to find where they are going to contribute and getting that confidence is stay true to yourself. Just be who you are. I think my daughter has a saying now, which is probably not a cool saying anymore, but was at one point in time. But she always says, you be you. I'm just being my best self. Yeah. And I'm like, if everyone could channel that and actually just be their best selves, then you'll find where you're supposed to be. You'll figure it out.
But that's a bit of a new philosophy in leadership, isn't it? This concept of being yourself and being humble in a lot of ways, because wasn't it a bit of an older leadership philosophy, is they use the phrase fake it till you make it, right? That you have to kind of be something else in order to succeed.
Yeah, and I think, that might be a philosophy that some people still live by. Yeah. It's definitely not mine. I've found I've gained more success by just being true to myself, just being myself. And, I think that's a little bit goes back to how I was raised. And this quote that someone actually quoted me in a podcast earlier was from my father, who always said, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And you just have to live by your own values. And in the beginning, you fake it and you try to be somebody that you're not. And very quickly you realize that that's not the way that you're really truly going to succeed. Or if you do, you're not going to feel good about it.
Yeah.
So, I do try hard to just be me and do the things that I feel align with my values and let me sleep at night.
Yeah, fair enough. Currently, the profession is 45% women. Rachel, you got your designation in 1999. What was the profession like when you started your career?
It's funny because I think it's not that long ago, but I guess since I celebrated my 25th anniversary, it's around that long ago that I entered the profession. And it's surprising how different it is now than it was then.
Yeah.
When I started, I was one of the few females interviewing for the positions that I was interviewing for. I do remember actually interviewing for a couple places where I said, I would never work here. There's no women. It was all men.
Yeah.
And, I do think that I came into the profession at that time where it was transitioning to having more women in leadership roles within firms.
Yeah.
But before that, there wasn't. I remember in the firm I started in, they had just made their first woman partner.
Okay.
It kind of shocks me looking back now because that doesn't seem that long ago. But it still was a very, very, very male-dominant world. And I remember going to professional development courses and being one of the only women in the class. I remember... and no disrespect to where I started, I think they were doing the best they could with what they had at the time. But the dress code for casual Fridays meant that women could wear pants.
Okay.
So that was kind of interesting to think back on that and think, wow, I can't believe that was only 20-some odd years ago where that happened. But it's interesting now. You say 45% female, and those female are very active in the profession. And when you go to professional development courses and when you look around, there are a lot more women at that level and participating in the profession, and you don't feel it so much within our profession. We're very lucky. As a leader of the profession, I've had the opportunity to go to other events and represent the CPA profession in other ways, and it's actually shocking sometimes when I go into a room and I am still the only woman in the room. And there are other professions that are still, very male-dominated, and other industries that are very male-dominant. And it kind of takes you back because we're so lucky to work where we do. For me, in my roles, you look at the leaders of the profession across the country, we're almost all women. And you kind of forget that there's still those pockets where it does make a difference and you still need to approach things a little bit differently. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to read a stat. So recent stats show that women hold less than 10% of C-suite positions at Canada's 100 biggest publicly traded companies. But you mentioned, obviously, in the Canadian accounting profession, of the 12 national, provincial, and regional accounting bodies that make up the accounting profession, 11 are led by female presidents and CEOs. So, and obviously you just mentioned that there are other professions that are still, trying to reach that gender balance. Why do you think the accounting profession bucks those trends when it comes to women in the profession and women in leadership roles?
Well, I think one of the things is that the profession just allows so many opportunities to do different things. We talk a lot about in the profession itself how we're changing and we're developing, and a CPA is very different than a typical accountant 25 years ago. We work in such a broad spectrum, and I think it allows us to balance our values and do things that are important to us. It's interesting as the profession's evolved. When I first became CEO of CPA Alberta, the stats weren't the way they are now. Yeah. So it just seems as the guard changes, there's just more women who are interested in taking on those types of roles. And I think it helps that there's women there already. So it kind of gives that confidence for other women to step up and do it as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned when, earlier in your career that you would walk into a room and you'd look around and there wouldn't be a lot of women there. Is there a moment that sticks out in your mind where you did look around and said, I think that things are changing. The landscape in terms of gender balance is looking different than I remember?
Yeah, I think, when I look at when it really happened would have been at, not that long ago, when at the Council of Chief Executives level, which is the leaders of the profession, when I walked in the room and there was only 2 males sitting there.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, when did this happen? So that would have been the most recent time. But probably when I moved to Alberta, and I don't know if it was the timing because I did move from Northern Ontario to Alberta, so a more rural environment, to Edmonton, so a more major center. And I took a PD course in Edmonton, and there were more women. It wasn't equal. There was still less than the males, but at the time there were more women. I thought, oh, this is different, because the last time I had been in a major center would have been early in my career. So the change from sort of that 1994-ish time line to about 2003, a significant change in that percentage as you walked into a room.
Yeah. So 2019 is an exciting year because it actually marks the 70th anniversary of the first woman in Alberta who received her accounting designation. Her name is Dorothy Reed, and there's an article in CPA Alberta's Capitalized magazine. So if you're listening to this and you're interested in reading it, please check it out. Obviously, she blazed a previously uncharted path for women to follow. And you talked a lot about the importance of role modeling in terms of it's easier for people to rise to the ranks if they see that other women have done it and they support each other. I'm certain that there are women out there who look at you and think that is such a fantastic example. I want to follow that example. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind for young female professionals?
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier is I want, the young female professionals to know that they can succeed being themselves. They don't have to be somebody else. They don't have to try to act in a different way. Mm-hmm. They need to understand how their counterparts, male and female, operate. And you need to adjust how you interact with them, but you shouldn't change yourself. So it's sort of that balance between understanding that, there will be times where you walk into a boardroom and your voice isn't heard.
Yeah.
But figure out how to get it heard and figure out a solution. And lots of times in that room, there'll be male counterparts who are more than happy to help you succeed. I would say one of my mentors as I went through the leadership of the profession and moved into the CEO role was Gary Hannaford from CPA Manitoba.
Okay.
And so he had been in the profession for ages. And so him and I often had conversations about how to make sure that, my voice was heard. And you just need to be true to yourself and be confident in yourself and find people to talk to work through issues and concerns and pick those areas where you think you can make a difference and make changes. Mm-hmm. But also keep in mind that everyone's doing the best they can with what they have.
Yeah.
And so you might not agree. You might feel, that they should be doing it differently, but maybe they don't know a better way.
Yeah.
So you need to be a bit empathetic in that way as well.
Okay. Obviously, as CEO, you're a leader. How did your CPA training prepare you to become a leader? Or were those leadership skills maybe there already and the CPA training brought it more out of you?
Yeah, I think I've always sort of had some of those leadership traits. I've always looked for positions where I could be in that leadership role as I came up through public school, into high school, into university. So I think I had some good base groundings on that and some good experience as I went. And I think kind of came a bit from my competitive nature. I always wanted to be improving and I always wanted to be doing better. And also from wanting other people to be better and to continue to improve. I always found in anything I did, it's always good to have someone who's almost at the same level as you because you can compete against each other to get better. But I think as far as bringing those skills really into line, it was the CPA and the education that I had in becoming a CPA that really brought that out, those analytical skills, those case studies that helped you think through the businesses and how to succeed and giving you that good solid base so you know your stuff. It's just now learning how to apply it and learning how to learn. Working with leaders of the profession, I think that's a great way to learn and develop those leadership skills and be confident in them. I still sometimes sit back and think, wow, someone lets me lead the profession? How did that happen? So even though I say you should be confident, it's not like I'm super confident in my skills. I once in a while need someone to say, yeah, you're doing a good job.
Well, Rachel, you were doing a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you.
So we talked about your leadership philosophy. In terms of your career to date, what is the most important lesson about leadership that you've learned so far?
Wow, what's the most important lesson? I think it is that your decisions have impacts on other people.
Okay.
So I won't get into sort of specifics of what that might be, but just recognizing that the decisions you make don't just affect you, they affect other people and they trickle down. And I guess one of the things that sort of brought that forefront in my mind was a course we went to where someone was talking about emailing. And when you email, and it was this ridiculous example. So they were saying, well, someone leaves work, they get home, they're settled in for the evening. They make a plan with their wife for the morning to drop the kid off at school, grab a coffee, and get to their meeting on time. And then their boss sends them an email late at night. They wake up at 6 a.m., read this email that they need to be in the office by 7 o'clock. And it totally throws their whole morning out, and they don't get to drop the kid off at school. So the wife has to. So the wife is mad. They don't get their coffee in the morning. So they're cranky when they get to work. And then, I mean, it's totally extreme. It ends up with a go home, they get divorced, the kids now like from a broken home. But, you know, the moral of the story is that simple email that you sent as a leader, which actually might not have been that important, does have ramifications for other people. So even though it's a ridiculous story and kind of like an extreme example, it kind of hit me. And I remember it often to think, you know what? Is what I have to say important enough to have to be said right now, or do I need to wait to a better time? And what I'm asking an employee to do, I might not think is that big of a deal, but it might actually affect what their plans were in their lives. So you have to kind of think it through.
Yeah. I feel like that example and kind of the domino effect is the textbook example of, you know, that escalated quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
So you talked about, obviously, the importance of being confident and how sometimes you maybe struggle a little bit with that confidence. Is being a leader all the time a role that you're entirely comfortable with? You know, you talked about the importance of how people rely on you and being the person who's responsible for driving that bus and making sure that you're leading people. But that must be a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I think it is. And you know, there's often times where I'm like, you know, maybe I'm not the best person to be leading this particular thing or this particular issue. And I do, like, I'm confident, but I do always think, like, you know, am I the right person for this job? Can I actually do this? So I think that's where it's important to have those goals and those objectives and those mentors and those people who you can talk to make sure that you are on the right path and you are doing the right thing. And, you know, in all areas of my life, I'm not the leader. Like, I do a lot of volunteer work where I'll step back and let someone else take it because it's their area of expertise. And even, you know, leading CPA Alberta, there's projects and whatnot that is better led by somebody else. And I'm happy to pass that on and let someone else do that. You know, recognizing when you should be leading and when you should be following. And, you know, I'm very fortunate at CPA Alberta. We have an amazing team. We have a great senior executive team too. And so I kind of look at us as more of a team. Like, we work together to achieve results. And sometimes I do have to step up into that leadership role. But more often, we work things through together, collaboratively. And it isn't that often where I'm the one who has to make the call. Lots of times we come up to the solutions together. So,
well, even just the fact that you say that you can admit, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm not the right person for the role. It ties back into what you said earlier about how important it is to have self-awareness and kind of reassess and check yourself. Because if you're so confident that you are doing the right thing without evaluating whether you are, then there's a potential for disaster there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, you know, sometimes you don't want to hear the feedback either, but you have to listen and you have to be like, okay, that was fair.
Okay, well, I mean, since you brought up the concept of feedback, how does someone hear feedback that maybe it's hard for them to hear?
Yeah, I might not be the best person for this question. Okay. But, you know, I think actually I probably have the flip side. I have more trouble getting feedback that I'm actually like doing a good job and getting the positive feedback, because I always think, oh, I could have done better. But, you know, I think it takes time and you have to really be open to wanting to grow and develop. And it's difficult to take the feedback and not take it too personally. Okay. For me, sometimes I have to remember, well, they only saw me in that one particular instance. And okay, maybe that comment was fair, but that's not how I am all the time. Mm-hmm. But then other times it's like, oh, yeah, actually, I need to work on that. Yeah. So I don't think it's easy. I don't know if I have any advice on how to do it. I just think you need to make sure you do and don't ignore it.
Yeah. So when it comes to developing as a leader, is there such a thing as an endpoint where you cross that line and say, yeah, I am the best leader, period?
Oh, I don't know if there is. I haven't got there yet. Okay. I think there's always ways to grow and develop. And I think, too, as far as a leader goes, you know, I have a certain style. I have a certain way I like to work and like to operate. And so, you know, some people who work with me may think, yeah, she's doing a great job and is a great leader. But other people, they might like a different leader. Yeah. So I think the other thing about being a leader is recognizing that, you know, you're not going to be everything to everybody. Yeah. And I think you have to find the type of leader to work with who suits your skills and the way you like to work as well. So,
yeah. So you'd mentioned earlier that in certain projects that there are people who you acknowledge are better to kind of lead that, and so you let them do it. How do you think you empower the people you work with and who work for you?
Oh, I know I should ask you that question.
Don't ask me that question.
Oh, I hope that I recognize the skills that other people have to bring to the table, and then I let them shine and use those skills and play to people's strengths. I'm a huge proponent of playing to your strengths and recognizing that everyone has strengths and everyone has weaknesses, and you can work as hard as you want on those weaknesses, or you might develop them a little bit, or you put that energy into your strengths and you find people who is strength is your weakness and leverage off of them. So I hope that from our team, what they see is that I really do try to let people develop in the areas where they're skilled and to take on things where it's their areas of expertise. I'll take things that are my area of expertise. So.
Well, I would say that you are excellent at determining what people's skills are and their strengths and allowing them to run in the areas that they are strong in.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I try. I do try that.
Well, since we're talking about strengths and weaknesses, I'm going to put you in the hot seat right now.
Oh.
What would you say your strengths are and what would you say your weaknesses are?
Oh, is this like the interview question where you're supposed to actually say your weakness is something that's really a strength?
Yeah. You say your need for perfection. That's a common one. Yeah.
Exactly. I work too hard.
It's fair. You do work too hard.
I think, my strengths, I would say, is seeing more longer term, seeing more into the future and how the decisions being made today will affect 10 years from now. I think that I have a really good memory. So I can actually bring back things that have happened in the past in a lot of detail, which helps me to, I think, formulate what that's going to affect in the future. So sort of that strategy end. I think one of the weaknesses is, I don't like routine. And I can get bored with the details. So sometimes I'm like, okay, I understand what that means, so move on. Whereas other people need more details and more precise wordings to get the concept. Yeah. So sometimes I think I operate too quickly and I know what I'm thinking, but I don't take the time to kind of make sure everybody else understands what I'm thinking.
So what advice would you have for someone who is starting out and is still trying to assess what their own strengths and weaknesses are?
I would say be very conscious about it.
Okay.
Think about it. Think about the things that you like to do and the things that you don't like to do. I once watched a video, and I can't remember the speaker's name off the top of my head, but he said, everybody has to do things in their job they don't like.
Yeah.
But once those things are more than 20% of your job, you need to reassess. And so, I saw that very early in my career, and I started recording the things that I really enjoyed doing and the things I really didn't enjoy doing. That helped me figure out where my strengths were, where my weaknesses were. And as I grew into the leadership positions, it allowed me to hire people to do those things I didn't like to do. And at first I kind of felt like, okay, that's not very nice to hire someone to do something I don't like. But then I realized that the things I didn't like, other people loved. Yeah. So you just have to find that right person who likes those things that you don't like and so that you can focus on the things you do like. And if you like it, it's probably an area of strength. If you didn't like it, you'd probably be struggling. It's probably one of your weaknesses then, right?
Okay, that's great advice. So what advice would you have for students and other professionals wanting to develop their leadership skills?
I would say volunteer.
Okay.
Get involved because that's the easiest place at a very low risk to try out some of those skills. Getting involved in not-for-profits with boards, either on a presenting to a board perspective or from a board member perspective, it allows you to learn from other people who are more experienced, who might have been on those boards for a while, but also lets you try out new things in a very safe environment and see how they work and how you can grow from them. Don't be afraid to try new things. And if you're in a role where a project comes up that you can lead, take a step up and lead or co-lead and watch what other people are doing, learn from other people. I always found I won't say there were no boring meetings, but I very rarely am in a boring meeting because if I'm not interested in the actual meeting material, I'm interested in the way people are presenting material or responding to material or interacting with each other.
Yeah.
So you can learn a lot from just being with people who are good at certain things.
Yeah.
And you can learn a lot by seeing people who aren't good at certain things. So when you're in a meeting and you see something and it goes wrong, you're like, why did that go wrong? Oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that in the future. Or someone who drives you nuts. doing a certain thing, you're like, okay, just make sure you don't do that. So,
Okay. So that is fantastic advice, and it seems like a good place to wrap up today's episode. Straight from the CPA's Mouth features Alberta CPAs talking about everything and anything. Rachel, is there a question you'd like to leave our next guest with to answer in the next episode?
oh, yeah, excellent. And thank you to everyone who listened to this episode. And thanks for asking me to be on it. My question for the next person would be, what is your approach to resolving conflict?
Oh, that is a very good question, because conflict is inherent and inevitable when you're working with other people.
Yes, and I'll be listening intently to the answer.
There you go. So, Rachel, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to add?
No, I think just I would encourage everyone, some of the conversations that we had today around keeping your options open, no matter where you are in your career path, whether you're starting your career or you're further into your career. Make sure you don't miss any of those doors. Don't let those doors close behind you. Make sure you explore those new opportunities. And I think a couple of the other podcasts talked about mentoring, and don't be afraid to ask for advice and to ask someone to mentor you and to mentor other people. And so I think I would leave you with that. And you are good enough.
There you have it, listeners, straight from the CPA's mouth. So thank you, Rachel, so much for joining me on the podcast and for the wonderful conversation. Thank you to all of you for listening. Be sure to check out our next episode featuring CPAs exploring conflict and how to resolve it. If you like what you've been hearing on Straight from the CPA's Mouth, let us know. Email knowledgecenter@cpaalberta.ca with your feedback and suggested topics and questions for future episodes. Straight from the CPA's Mouth is brought to you by the CPA Education Foundation. The CPA Education Foundation is the charitable arm of the Alberta CPA profession, providing up to $1.2 million each year in support of business and accounting education in the province. This podcast is just one of many resource materials available through the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center. This virtual hub features Alberta CPAs sharing their unique perspective and vast expertise on topics and issues such as leadership, finance, entrepreneurship, and more. Visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation for more information on the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center and to learn how Alberta CPAs inspire success.